take your team to the next level. So please join me in welcoming Steve Harvey from FRC Team 1678, the Citrus Circuits.
Hey guys.
Hello, Steve.
That was a great presentation by Tom. Really enjoyed it.
It was, yeah.
And I'm not even an artificial intelligence kind of guy, but I enjoyed it.
It was very interesting. It was very useful to learn about. Are you ready to start your presentation?
I am ready, yeah. Share my screen here with you guys. Okay, so this is obviously an FRC presentation. You'll notice there's a little story behind this title because it still says St. Louis Workshop Series. We attended the LA Regional this year, and then a couple of weeks later, we were getting ready for St. Louis. We actually sent our team all the way out to St. Louis on the plane. I drove the team trailer 2,000 miles from Davis over to St. Louis. We got to St. Louis, we unloaded, we unpacked. I got my presentation all set up. Next morning we show up, I'm getting ready to give my presentation. Our robot gets through inspection, and about 8:45, an announcement comes over the speaker that they've canceled the regional. So we pack up, we go back in the trailer, and we drive 2,000 miles all the way back to Davis. So it's kind of an experience. It was a fun trip across the country, but we did not get to compete in St. Louis. We were very lucky to be honored with the Chairman's Award win there, so we're excited about that. But this was the presentation I was going to give at St. Louis, so I'll give it to you guys here. We canceled the regional. So we pack up, we go back in the trailer, and we drive 2,000. So just to quickly mention who I am, I'm the lead mentor of Team 1678. I was a civil engineer prior to becoming a teacher in 2001. Started the team back in 2004, and I've been with the team ever since. I'm married with 2 kids, and I love to windsurf. As you can see, this is me at the Delta in Sacramento. And I also love to mountain bike. So why am I here talking to you guys? Well, first of all, as a teacher, I can tell you, I think FIRST Robotics is one of the greatest educational programs that we have. And when I talk to other people that have seen FIRST, they tend to agree with me, and they're just super excited about how much hands-on learning takes place, how inspiring it is, how it lets people pursue their own individual challenges. And I want to say that I really understand those challenges, because when we started, we were a fledgling team. This is actually a picture of our robot in 2005. And I don't know if you can tell, but this is actually a step ladder that we got from Home Depot, because we couldn't figure out how to build the superstructure of our robot. So we just put a step ladder on it and then put this arm, and we were super excited to be able to even compete that year. And the other main reason that I want to talk to you guys is that I think the success that we've come to know through all the experiences we've had has not been because of luck. It's because of specific things that we've done along the way, and the teams, the inspiring teams that we've learned from. So there are keys to success, and I'm hoping I can illustrate some of those keys tonight. First is about setting goals, in my opinion. So obviously people like to win, and we enjoy winning competitions too. But if your only goal is to win, then a lot of you are going to be disappointed, because not everyone can win. So I think setting goals like, let's try to get to the, let's try to get to the finals of this regional, or let's try to just get a robot that can actually, score at least 3 or 4 balls in the upper goal to, in this recent competition. That would be a goal that is achievable and that you can feel like you have success in doing. So I think that defining goals that are realistic is an important part of FIRST. So this is basically the structure of my presentation. I'm going to be talking about all of these aspects that I think teams can focus on to try to help them improve. And when I say get to the next level, I guess I should back up and say this is not a title that I came up with. We were talking to the organizers of the St. Louis Regional, and they wanted us to give some presentations there. So we asked them what they would like to hear about. And they said, we would like to hear a presentation on how you take your team to the next level. So I think that honestly can apply to every team. I mean, you know, every team can aspire to do better than they're doing currently. So these things apply to everybody at every level. So these are the 6 areas I'm going to go through. Hopefully I can get through all of them. And we'll just jump into the first one right away here. So how you organize your team is really up to you, but this is actually a chart I think I got from 1114's website, very respectable FRC team. Basically just having some kind of structure to your team, and I think drawing it out in some kind of a chart so people can see what that structure is and visualize it is important to setting the direction of control, because I think you don't want everybody on your team trying to do what's going on up here, and you don't want everyone on the engineering team trying to do what's going on here. You want everybody to be designated their tasks, but have someone that's above them that can help direct them and guide them. And obviously you're going to have the most experienced people at the top of this tree. In our case, 1678, this overall authority is the team captain, the team vice captain, myself, and Mike Corsetto. I'm sure any of you that know 1678 know Mike. He's our lead technical mentor and drive coach. So that's our kind of core leadership, we call it. And then we actually have sub-teams under that I'll talk about in a minute. So how you lay out your sub-teams on your team is really up to you. This is sort of the way we lay out our sub-teams. I think it's important that you do this, and it's also important that the teams that you develop do communicate together. So I'll talk about communication in a little bit, but just bear that in mind that those are the sub-teams that our team has, but you could have whatever sub-teams seem to suit your particular organization. And then you have students on your team, obviously, but I think it's very important to think about how you want to include mentors and coaches on your team. This is a question that comes up a lot, is how involved should a mentor be? And I've seen everything from teams where the mentors are in the pit rebuilding the robot during competition, all the way to teams that come to competition with virtually no mentor support, or maybe no mentor support at all. And the students on the team make all the decisions logistically and technically. So I'm not going to say which method is best. What I will say is that if you look at the most successful teams in FIRST, and I don't just mean successful in terms of on the field, I mean successful in terms of everything they do to inspire other teams, including their outreach. I think what you'll find is those teams have developed a very successful student-mentor partnership. So basically working hand in hand with your mentors, involving your mentors, asking your mentors for help when you need it, and even sometimes relying on mentors when you've come to a point where you can't actually fix the problem. So communication, I mentioned this when I was talking about sub-teams. Communication, I think, is the foundation of your entire team. How you communicate, how you connect with both your team members, your mentors, your parents, and your community, how you involve everybody is super important. So on a team level, we use email, Google Drive, and Slack. But as a logistical thing, we hold regular leadership team meetings. And I would encourage any team that has not developed this protocol yet, I would suggest that you have a sub-team lead for each of your sub-teams. And it's up to you how you do that. Some people vote. We actually do an interview appointment process. And then you regularly meet with those members of the sub teams, those leadership people. And we call that a leadership meeting. We have our leadership meetings once a week. We meet for about an hour and we discuss the higher level stuff, but we're very transparent about sharing that with the rest of our team. And then obviously you want to have regular meetings with your team. But most of all, I think you want to try to involve all of the people on your team, including mentors and parents. This is actually a parent meeting, and I'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about fundraising. And here we are with fundraising. So obviously, any successful team is going to need to be able to raise money. And obviously, the more money you can raise, the more things you can do. For us, that isn't just being able to build 3 robots every year, which is currently what we try to do, and attending 3 regional competitions every year. And fortunately, we've been able to go to champs every year for the last 10 years. It's not just that, it's also being able to do all of the outreach and support things in your community to help build your team's credibility. So there are various sources of funds. I think one of the most overlooked are FIRST grants. It amazes me how every year I find out that teams haven't even looked into this, but FIRST offers all kinds of grants, and I would encourage you to find out if your team qualifies for any of them. There are educational, when I say FIRST grants, it's not just from FIRST directly, but FIRST gives you opportunities to get grants from places like NASA, from Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and other companies like that. And we've been very successful in securing several of those grants recently. So I would encourage you all to apply for those. There are educational grants that you can apply for. But I think for most of us, when we're trying to raise money, we're probably looking at local companies. And if you're fortunate enough to have a university on your doorstep like we are, working with your university or college to try to see if they'll support you in some way. And the last support that we lean on very heavily is our parents. And I know that this is obviously dependent on socioeconomics, but I've even talked to some fledgling teams in some very underrepresented areas. And when they can get their parents involved and the parents see what they're doing, parents can be very generous. So I would encourage you to try all of these different resources for funding. So talking about parent support, I would assume that if you're a team of 20 people, let's say, which might be an average team size, say 15 to 20 people, then I would assume you probably have a pool of perhaps between 20 and 30, maybe 40 parents. So that's a lot of support that you can get from people if they're willing to just volunteer their time. So we go very directly to our parents early on in the season, and we ask for support in terms of the logistical support, like driving, like preparing food for the kids. Sorry about my dog barking. Preparing food. They may work for companies that will match their donations. But the biggest ask that we have for our parents is actually a pledge. So we very directly go to our parents, and this is a picture of our parent information night. And we organize this parent information night where the students put on the whole show. They prepare a barbecue. They prepare presentations for the parents on each of the sub teams. They show the parents what we do. They get the parents excited about everything that we're doing in our team. And then at the end of the presentation, we basically hand out a pledge form and we say, okay, so this is the money that we need to operate this year. This is how much we're going to get from our sponsors. So here's the gap, and we need you to try and fill up this gap. And we've been very successful in filling that gap every year. So I would encourage you to really be direct with your parents and ask them directly for their financial support, because they know the value of this program. It's also important when you get sponsors to keep them. So make sure that you acknowledge your sponsors on a yearly basis. Send out newsletters to them on a regular basis so that they know what the team is doing. Send out press releases to newspapers and put your sponsors on those press releases and thank them. Make sure your sponsors are well displayed on your robot. I know most of you guys do that already, but just be really as clear as you can to acknowledge them, and your t-shirts and everything else. And then one more thing that you could try if you haven't done this. We started about 3 years ago having a sponsor open house. So basically we do the same kind of thing as the parent information night, except we do it specifically for sponsors. And we've moved to a model recently actually where we just do it over a week-long period. And we invite sponsors into our shop and we guide them through everything that we're doing. We thank them, we give them some food. We just basically interact with them and tell them how valuable they are. And when they see what we're doing, that's really the most that they want. That they're not so excited about us giving them big praise and thank yous and gifts and things. They're more excited to see that the money that they're spending is going to a really good cause. And they'll see that in your sponsor open house. So now we're coming to perhaps the nuts and bolts of how to improve your team, particularly in terms of your technical ability at competition. If your team isn't currently doing anything outside of competition season, then I would strongly encourage you to look at the mantra here that winners are made in the off season, because a lot of FRC teams subscribe to that mantra. And so that starts with training. And we've developed a model for training that I think has been very successful. It does take some time to implement, as the last bullet says here. But basically what we do is, as we go through each season, our seniors are the ones that are training the junior members of the team, because they have spent 4 years on our team. So they've essentially become experts. In many cases, much more expert than any of our mentors. So this does a lot of things. It builds camaraderie in your team. I think when students are teaching students, it also makes your model much more sustainable, because if you're relying on a mentor to do all your instruction and teaching, if that mentor decides to leave or he retires or something, which I'm getting very close to personally myself, so our team knows about this, then you may lose a great resource for your teaching. Whereas if your students have become the main instructors of your learning model, then this is a program that can sustain into the future. And believe me, when this model starts working, it just improves year by year, because the students are very inspired by their peers. And so the next year they want to do just as good, if not better job than their peers did the year before. So the basic training from your peer-to-peer model is good, but I think because I talked about how FIRST is such a hands-on experience, I think a lot of learning really takes place when you actually do FIRST, when you actually do FIRST robotics, when you're actually building robots. So in the off season, we have a lot of projects that we try to do hands-on stuff with. We do a mock kickoff. And so a mock kickoff is you just choose a previous year's game. I would suggest you choose a game that your team is not familiar with. So pick an older game and you play the game animation and you show them the game manual and you have them read the manual and understand the rules. And then from there, you can take it into the stages of developing your robot design, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And you can take that as far as you want. You could even take it into the prototyping stage and actually try to have them design basic prototypes for that challenge. I also think it's a really good idea to build an off-season robot if you can. So take some time, get your design team working on it. We tend to let the students completely run on their own with the off-season with very little mentor guidance. I think they learn a lot from that experience. This is actually the off-season robot we built in 2016. So it was a catapult designed on a turret on a very, very small drive base. And well, I'm not going to say any more than that for now, because I think I have another picture coming up. So we basically run prototyping challenges as well, where we basically just take old game pieces, and over a 2-day period, we just tell the students, your goal is to pick up 6 of these cubes and put them on this ledge, or to shoot as many of these balls as you can through this hole. And so they're given some plywood and some 2x4s and a bunch of screws, and everyone gets a drill, and they have access to our machines, and they have to come up with a prototype to meet the challenge. And then we have a big competition at the end. So I think prototyping challenges have been one of our most successful ways to develop our students' ability in both design and fabrication of robots. You can always rewire last season's robot. You can get your electrical team working on that. Just literally tear all the wiring off it completely down to the bare frame and motors, and say, go ahead and rewire it. And then you can just have mini robot competitions. So what I mean by that is, if you happen to have any small Lego robots or Vex robots or whatever, you could hold little mini robot competitions where you're maybe giving the programmers some challenges. Oh, I don't have the other picture. There's a picture of this robot upside down, which is, I was going to show you that because this was actually one of those off-season robots that did not do too well. It was such a high center of mass considering the small wheelbase that it just kept tipping over. So then obviously, I think a lot of teams are doing this anyway, but I just wanted to mention that you should definitely do some specific in-house training where you're spending some time teaching your kids how to use all the tools. And those tools could be the mechanical tools for the fabrication team. They could be the tools that the electrical team needs to use. They could be the tools that the business and media team need, like Adobe Photoshop or any of the Adobe suite tools that are necessary for the business and media team to do their job. And we even do sometimes we do some more sort of, I guess, I can't think of the word for it, but non-technical type training, I guess, where we sometimes invite parents or mentors that have experience in leadership. And we'll talk about leadership ability and how you improve leadership, because obviously leadership is very important for FRC. And then there's tons of online resources available for you to use. So I would just mention a few. Obviously, Chief Delphi is something you can be on 24 hours a day. I'm not a big Chief Delphi fan because it just sucks too much time out of me. But I know some students that spend time on Chief Delphi, and I think that can be useful. The Blue Alliance has statistical stuff that you can look at. You can look at teams' performances. You can look at videos. The Blue Alliance posts videos of most of the latest competitions, and you can go look at key either qualification or elimination matches and see how teams are doing to develop your strategies. We use those videos all the time to train our strategy team, which I think I'm going to talk a little bit about later. There are a ton of teams that do fall workshops. So I just mentioned our workshops. We run fall workshops at our Capital City Classic competition in October every year, and we stream those live, and we've also recorded them. So if you go to our website, you can access those workshops and get information from that. And then the last resource that I would just point you to is the Compass Alliance, which is a fairly recently formed alliance between some of the FRC teams in first, including 3132, and our team, and several other teams that have basically put together a whole resource center that you can use to get information at every level of FRC, whether you're a rookie team, a mid-level team, or even experienced teams can get all kinds of information from this resource. So I'm sure if you need more information about that, you can get that from 3132, or you can just go to our website, and there's a link to it on our website too. So I want to talk about off-season competitions because I think there's a huge opportunity if you haven't attended off-season competitions. And it works in your favor in so many ways. I would say number one, as a recruitment tool, and you can recruit, it's not just, I'm not just talking about recruiting team members, I'm talking about recruiting mentors, sponsors, as well as new team members. Because when you talk to people about FRC, they go, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, I could see how that'd be interesting. When you take people to an FRC competition, their jaws drop. And this has happened every single time that we have brought, like, for example, one of our school board members or our high school principal. If you haven't had these people attend any kind of a competition, then you definitely should get them to do that, because you'll see the results are amazing and things start spiraling from there, and your team will get so much more support. So obviously, if you could get them to an FRC regular season competition, that'd be fine. But off-season competitions are usually a little bit lower entry bar. You know, it's just the time of year and it's lower key, and so it's easy to get people to come to them, I think. It's an opportunity to use your off-season robot. If you did build a practice spot, you can bring that. A lot of these off-season competitions allow you to bring as many robots as you want. So we have typically brought up to 3 different robots to off-season competitions and competed with them all. And that gives a lot of members of your team an opportunity to drive the robot and be the drive coach and things like that. So you learn a lot from other teams, obviously, and you can train your scouts. And then most importantly in FRC, if you're not having fun, then you should be, because it's supposed to be fun, right? So doing things to provoke, to increase morale is very important for your team. So we hold regular team events and parties. Obviously during COVID, this is harder right now. We work on outreach projects. And then we have regular, what we call WETPANs. WETPAN stands for work all day, play all night. So we use these as an opportunity to work on doing basic things like cleaning up the shop and getting things ready for competition, et cetera. And then the play at night things, or play all night. We host little games and competitions that the students can get involved in and have fun. Okay, so we get to build season. How do we start? So this is going to be a real quick run through. There are lots of details in every one of these steps, and I'll try to just highlight what I think is important. It's very important to read the rules and make sure everyone understands them. So we actually have a rules test to make sure people understand them. It's also very important to develop a game strategy and decide what your robot is going to do before. This is super important, before you decide how your robot's going to do it. There's a great tendency among a lot of students and maybe even some mentors to see the game video and go, oh yeah, we need to build an elevator with a rolly grabber intake with a wrist and, you know, whatever, climbing system, whatever, right? So, and you're already designing a robot when you haven't even figured out how you're going to play the game. You don't even know the rules of the game yet. So this is super important to make sure that you develop this kind of game strategy, how you're going to play the game, which determines what your robot is going to do. So our robot is going to be able to pick up from the ground. Our robot's going to be able to pick up from the human loading station. Our robot's going to be able to shoot this many balls, those kind of things. So come up with a list of attributes you want your robot to have. Then you go into design. We take about 1 to 3 days to complete this process. And at the end of that, we come up with a short list of the mechanisms we want to have on our robot. Then we jump into prototyping. We actually break out into teams for each of the different mechanism designs that we want to try to work on. We have a separate prototyping team. 2 to 4 students. We have at least one experienced student on each team. And we try to even get a mentor on each team. You want to use the simplest materials that you can build the prototype the quickest. And then it's very important that you test and test and test your prototype. Some people, when they build a prototype, they'll, like, for example, in this case, just shoot the ball and it goes in the goal and they go, great, our prototype works perfectly. But what you haven't done is done things like maybe pushed another robot up in front of it, maybe put the ball in a very difficult position to grab, force the ball into positions where it's going to be hard for the driver to actually get to, and see how the prototype works under those stress conditions. So that's what I mean by test, test, test. Make sure you document everything you're doing. And then, and then remember that your prototyping process never, ever stops. We are prototyping all the way through championships. Even while we're competing in the championship matches, we're thinking about ways we can improve our robot. So you're always, always prototyping. The last thing here is FFSS. If you're not sure what that stands for, it's fail faster to succeed sooner. So during the prototyping process, you want to actually be as efficient as you possibly can to get to the failure points as fast as possible, so that you have time to change them and improve them. And then you'll have success. So you're always, always prototyping. The last thing here is, my bad. So make sure you have a schedule. Make sure that you build driver practice into your schedule. I would recommend all FRC teams dedicate at least 2 weeks of driver practice into their schedule, which means you really have to build your robot in 4 weeks. It's probably a little unfair for me to say students always underestimate time, because the truth is mentors underestimate time too. So build a schedule allowing for that driver practice, and make sure you try to stick to it. Our team tries to get the Drivebase completely designed and under fabrication within the first week, because we want to actually complete it by the end of the second week. And there's a couple of reasons why we do that. The first reason is because we want to be able to start building our superstructure onto it and get a fully built robot. But the second, maybe even more important reason, is we want to give a drive base to our programmers so they can start developing the drive paths for our autonomous routines. Because having well-developed autonomous routines has shown to be one of the key ingredients to being successful, particularly at your first regional. You want to decide at some point to freeze your actual design. You don't want to keep iterating your design when you're going through build season, because if you keep changing things up until the last minute, you're not going to actually be ready and tested before your first competition. And that allows you time to actually finish off your autonomous routines and test them with the full mechanism. So come up with a hard deadline for when your design is going to be frozen, and then stick to it. This makes sure that you have time for driver practice. So we get to competition season. This is kind of an old photo, but I kept it in there just to remind us that we don't have this anymore. Obviously now build season is as long as you want to make it into your competition season. There is no hard break anymore. But the main message I'm trying to give here is that use your competition season. So once you start your first competition, use that to improve. And this is really dependent on you signing up for at least 2 or more competitions, and then maybe having the luck of qualifying for championships in some way. Because you learn so much in your first competition about the way to play the game and how your robot works, that you can build on that and be so much more successful in future competitions. So that leads into the idea of building at least 2 robots. Some people think now with no bag day that it isn't really that big of a deal to build 2 robots. We actually build 3. The advantage of having more than one robot is that you can develop different robots at different paces and move your latest and greatest iterations of your mechanisms onto the final robot. And you can also allow different sub-teams to work on the different robots. So we have one that's being developed as the competition robot. And then we have two other robots, one that is primarily used by the programming team, and then the other that's used by the mechanical team to test all the mechanisms. So it's important to analyze the game, obviously. So what we do is hold a webcast party, and we start looking at the new game as soon as it comes out in week 0. If we're not in a week 1 competition, obviously we're going to watch all the week 1 competitions, and we're going to look at how other teams are playing the game, because that will help us develop our key strategies. And it also gives you a big opportunity to train your scouts. Obviously, you need to get ready for competition. So make sure you're organized, that you define your roles. Obviously, you should have established how you're going to scout. And then create a schedule that actually says who's going to be where and when. And make sure everyone knows this schedule and has access to it. So we basically create a schedule on the Google Drive, and it's very detailed. It's down to every half hour. This is which team is supposed to be where at what time and what they're doing. Having an organized pit is super important. Our team knows this well because we've been through many years of having very disorganized pits. And case in point was 2015. If you went into our pit at Champs in 2015, it would have looked like we were some kind of rookie disaster team. It was just a complete mess. And ironically, that was the year we won the World Championship. But since then, we've improved a lot with our pit organization. This is one of the better teams in the world in terms of organization spectrum. You need to have management of your scouts. So make sure we have a scout leader that's organizing the scouting team, that's making sure everyone's on their tablets at the correct time. Make sure you know your match schedule. That seems like an obvious one, but it's amazing how many teams don't. You should have a checklist for your robot, having all of the important items. Like, I mean, it may seem silly, but make sure the battery's been replaced, something our team has been guilty of in the past, not having a fully charged battery on board, which will kill you. And then obviously having a good battery management system. So you should have a system where you're checking in your batteries that need charging, and you should have a way of marking when they're fully charged, and have a good rotation system going so that you always have that on board when you're competing. There's some other things that go along with the technical stuff, like having a great team image. I think it always helps to work on your team image. And we tell our team to go out and make as many friends as they possibly can, because it doesn't just help them, it helps you as well. Helps you learn more about FRC when you talk to other teams. Ask for and give for as much help as you can. Other teams appreciate it. If you're an experienced team, try to share your resources with them. It always makes you feel good, and the payback's going to be enormous later on. If you have awards to present, make sure you're prepared for those. And there are various awards that are given that are not specific submittals, like some of the engineering technical awards. And so it's a good idea to have people in the pit that are ready to talk to judges about those things. And then, of course, again, make sure that everyone's having fun. Now, I can't emphasize how important it is, particularly when you get to your first competition, that you are the first team through inspection. You want to be first in line, you want to get inspected and get on the practice field. And the reason for that is that you may have noticed that when the first teams get on the practice field, there's only like 1 or 2 teams there. And then what you see is the same teams rotating through the line multiple times before finally at about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, there's a massive line, and now you got to wait. So it's a big advantage to get on the real field and play the real game, to tune up your robot before competition. We always do it. Oh, there's the picture I was talking about earlier. It's always good to debrief. It's always good to ask, why did 86-78 roll over in all those matches? So I'm going to speed up a little bit because I've got a few more things to talk about. But basically, I just want to emphasize the importance of debriefing every competition. We're going to talk quickly about scouting and strategy. There's objective scouting that you're doing from the stands. If you want more information about how we actually do objective scouting, we have released a scouting white paper. So you can look on Chief Delphi for access to that, or you can just email our team or look on our website. And then the subjective scouting, which is something we started several years ago, which is most important for when you're trying to make a pick list and trying to decide on your second pick, because many times your second pick is not going to be an offensive robot. So the data that you've collected doesn't always tell you enough about who are going to be the best second picks. You want things like good drivability and a good maneuverability, the ability to play good defense. And so we have a super scout system. I'm not going to go into that. Again, our white paper details this. And then you need to come up with some kind of ranking system for that data, that subjective data. I'm a big believer in pit scouting. We have a team called SEALs, which stands for Strategic Evaluation of Alliance Limitations. And what we do is we don't go into people's pits and say, can you do this or can you do that, or how many can you score or what can you do? We actually build mechanisms that we can use to test robots. So this is an example in 2016 where robots had to drive up to the batter. This is the wooden thing you see there as a batter. And you all had to be on the batter at the end of the match to capture the castle, which gave you an extra ranking point. And since extra ranking points are so important, one of the ways we try to rank high is to make sure that our alliance partners are well tested in the maneuvers that are necessary for those. I could give you countless other examples of things we've done to test things like crossing the auto line in 2018, in being able to get up on our climber in 2018 so that we can do the buddy climb. We actually build mechanisms to test robots rather than just relying on them saying they can do it. You also get other information from doing pit scouting. When you walk into a pit, you can see how organized their team is. And you can sort of check out their robot for its build quality. So there's a lot of things you can do without actually asking questions. Obviously you want to ask them if it's okay, but I would avoid asking too many questions that you can get the answers to by just looking. Match strategy is super important, particularly during competition. So we've got to the mode of where we actually appoint a strategist. The strategist is actually separate from our drive coach, Mike Corsetto. And the strategist's job is to just communicate with the drive coach, but also to use the scouting data to inform the matches that they're discussing the strategy for. So this is a way of exploiting other teams or your team's strengths and the opposing team's weaknesses. If you are in a position to be picking, you obviously want to develop a pick list, and you want to have the objective, I mentioned this before, you want to have the objective scouting data informing your first pick list, and then the subjective data usually informing your second pick list. Make sure that you actually have a final list. We actually write out our pick list and we hand it to the captain. It's a piece of paper, or whoever's actually representing our team as the person out on the field. And you want to make sure that that person knows to just cross off teams as they're picked so that you end up picking the best person on the list that's left. So some final thoughts. I just sort of try to summarize some of the things I think are key. Obviously, working hard is so key to first. Stay focused on your goals, whatever they were. Keep thinking back to the design goals that you've come up with and keep focusing on the important ones. Don't try to invent things when other people have done it before you. 1678, every year, pretty much copies someone else's mechanism in some way. So we constantly steal from the best. And you've heard it before, so I'll say it again, keep it simple, because the more complicated things you try to do, the harder it is to achieve your goals. And then once again, have fun. So thank you for your time to listen to my presentation. And I think there's a couple of emails here you can jot down. I guess, is there a way that we can make this presentation available to everybody?
Yeah, the videos will be uploaded to YouTube afterwards, so people will be able to access them from there.
Awesome. So you'll have this, And then there's my personal email and the FRC 1678 Gmail that you can contact us.
We have a few questions from the live chat that I would like to ask you.
Okay.
So the first one is, in your personal opinion, what do you think the optimal team size is?
That's a really great question. I mean, and I'm not sure what it is. I think it's dependent on your team. I will tell you we're at about 100 people right now, and I'll be honest, I think that's a little too big. It's getting tough to manage that size of team. We actually discussed this a couple of years ago, and there was a proposal to say, could we limit our team to about 50 team members? And maybe that's a number that I could throw out as being an optimal team size. I think there are very, very successful teams, 330 being a good example, who have a very small team size. I think 330's team at the last championships that they were at, which was 2019, I believe, right? Is that when 330 was? I think that's their last year. I think their team size was probably about 12 or 15 or something like that. So they did very well. But if you want a full scouting team and you want to have all the logistical support that I've been talking about, I think you need between 40 and 50 team members. We take 44 to competition. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Another question. What would you recommend that teams do when meeting up online, since they can't meet in person? How would they go about meeting online?
That's a great question too, and obviously we're trying to do more and more of that now because of the COVID situation. I think one of the great benefits of meeting up online with other teams is you just get to connect with people and get to know them personally. So I think that's super important. Have a prepared list of questions that you want to ask the team. If your focus is outreach, have specific questions you would like to ask them about outreach. If your focus is technical stuff, have those questions prepared. But I think going in with very specific prepared questions that you're going to ask is important. Otherwise, the conversation just can tend to just go around in circles, and you have a good time, but you don't learn a whole bunch.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Another question. What is your opinion on building a Drivebase before the game is actually announced?
I'm not sure that's technically even legal, but perhaps with the no bag day rules now, it is technically legal. I would have to defer to someone who's read the rules in more detail than I have. But assuming you could technically build your entire Drivebase ahead of time, I think you're taking a risk. Obviously, the risk would be that you'd have to just toss it aside and start from scratch and build another one. So maybe a team with a lot of resources wouldn't consider that a great risk. But there have been years where 1678 has deviated, I wouldn't say significantly from their basic West Coast six-wheel drivetrain. But for example, in 2016, we went to an 8-wheel and we had pneumatic wheels and it was higher off the ground. And if we had just built our standard Drivebase, it would have been a complete failure in 2016. So if you're super efficient, like I say, you should be able to get your Drivebase built in a couple of weeks. And I don't think that's a severe detriment to your team because you're going to be doing a lot of prototyping in the first 2 weeks anyway. So you're not really ready to do anything more than just your Drivebase. And so I would sort of say, wait and really understand the rules of the game before you start building your Drivebase. But once you do know the rules, jump on it and build it as quickly as you can. Hopefully that answers your question.
Another question. Do you have any tips on establishing a good scouting culture for your team?
Yeah, that's another really great question. Scouting culture is something that we've struggled with ourselves because just to give you an example, at competition, we send our scouting team over to the doors of the arena early to stand in line to get in, to get a good place in the stands. And then about an hour later, our drive team comes, because our drive team is going to go into the pits, and it's pretty easy to get into the pits fairly quickly, whether you're in the front of the line or not. So there was some resentment between some of the team members that why is it the scouting team that has to stand in line for an hour? And so we're trying to deal with that. And part of the reason, part of the problem, I think, is that the scouting team sometimes feels undervalued because they don't see their role as important, perhaps, as the drive team's role. So we've made it super clear to our scouting team that, number one, we can't compete effectively in qualification matches without the scouting data. Their data is absolutely critical to our team's performance in qualification matches. And then the second thing is that 1678 is really proud of the picks that we've made when we've been an alliance captain and being able to pick our second and third robot. And I think we've developed a very successful scouting system that gives us very good choices, and we've let our scouting team know that that is the case. So we feed that back to them, we celebrate them, we tell them how important they are. And I think all of that goes towards building a good culture.
Yeah, scouting is very important, and your approach is very good.
It's just as important as the robot.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we have another question. Are there any examples that you can give of your team stealing from the best and inventing the rest?
Well, if you look at our intake in 2018, you will see, sorry, 2019. If you look at our intake in 2019, you will see that it looks remarkably like 1323's intake. So there's one example. In 2013, which is the first year we got to Einstein, we had a robot that was barely able to shoot Frisbees at the Central Valley Regional that we ended up winning because we got helped by a great cross-court shooter. But at that competition, we saw 973's shooter, and we literally just copied their shooter and put it on our robot, and it improved our robot dramatically. In 2011, we literally put an image of Team 100's rolly grabber up on a screen, and we drew on a whiteboard around the edge of it, made a template, and we built our rolly grabber on that. We've copied 254's ramp designs. We've copied 118's can grabbers. We've copied 3310, kind of a combination of 3310 and 118's can grabbers in 2015, which set us on a path to winning the World Championship. So is that enough examples? I mean, I could go on. I'm sure I could come up with another 20.
Those are really good examples, though. Thank you. Another question. How do you teach CAD and designing for FRC in the summer?
So we've moved to Onshape right now. And I'm a teacher, so I teach an intermediate robotics class where we actually do some Onshape too. So I'm pretty familiar with the tutorials. Onshape has a great educational platform. It's free for educators. And it has a whole bunch of learning pathways. So under the guidance of our senior CAD designers, we have our CAD designers go through the Onshape learning pathways and tutorials. And then we start giving them specific design projects on the robot. So the junior CAD design members are designing smaller mechanisms or smaller parts of our overall robot and allowing our main designers to incorporate those into the full robot design.
And one final question. How do you feel about systems where members need to apply and get accepted before joining a team?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yep, sorry. How do you feel about a system where members need to apply and get accepted before joining a team?
Someone obviously knows that's what we do on our team. I think we've gone to that system partly because our team has grown so big that we're in a position, like, for example, this year, if we had accepted every applicant, we would be growing to about 150 students. And we literally don't even have a building big enough to support that. So for us, it's almost out of necessity, but I really like the process. I like the process because it gives you an opportunity to talk to people about why are they motivated to join your team. And I don't know about your teams, but on 1678, we don't want people that are super smart. I mean, we love people that are super smart. I'm not saying we don't want them. I'm just saying that that's not our key thing. We're not looking for people that are super smart. We're not looking for people that already have a bunch of expertise. We're looking for people that want to work hard and dedicate themselves to our team. And it's the easiest way to find out whether they're going to do that is to actually have them working on your team. But prior to them joining your team, the only way you're going to know that is by at least talking to them and asking them a few questions. So I think you get a pretty good idea of that level of dedication. When someone is late to their interview, or someone shows up with kind of a sleepy attitude or doesn't seem very interested, and when you ask the question, what inspired you, they say, oh, I don't know, my mom said I should do it. You learn a ton about whether that's the kind of person you want to have on your team. So I think it's a good process. I like it.
Sorry, I thought that was the final question. We actually have one more question.
Okay.
When you're analyzing a new game, what are some things you look for or keep in mind when determining how to play it?
Man, you guys are asking super good questions, super hard questions. That's obviously something we have to go through every year. It's so hard to answer in 1 or 2 lines because there's so many different angles we approach it from. We have students that are very interested in statistics, so they're looking at, you know, the scoring system and how maximum points could be achieved. We start to look at counter strategies like that could be played against an offensive team, as well as looking at offensive strategies. Obviously, we're looking at how you maximize your points. But I will tell you that I think some of the keys that we probably focus on a lot are what kind of an autonomous mode can you do that is going to give you an advantage coming out of autonomous? That's one of the first things we're looking at. So you'll notice that 1678 always posts a censored video of our autonomous mode that we've developed that can score 2 balls in 2016 when no one else thought that was possible. So we look at ways that we can maximize our autonomous. And I've lost my train of thought, but definitely with autonomous, we're looking at ways to do that. Yeah.
That's all we have time for today. So thank you very much for your presentation. It was very insightful. I'm sure that it'll be very helpful to new teams or people looking to improve how they view the game.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed being here. Thanks very much.
Have a good night.
Take care, guys.
Is that a conclusion? Oh, I guess that was the end of their question.
Take care.